The disciples are fighting over greatness. Who's on top? Who's first? Who gets the glory? Jesus shuts it down with 4 words, "Not so among you." Then he says something no one saw coming, that true greatness looks like serving, and their master himself is headed for a cross. We're exploring Mark 10:41-45. Let's read verse 41 from the ESV. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. When they heard, what? James and John had just asked Jesus to grant them high positions in his kingdom, one seated on his right and the other seated on his left. When the other 10 apostles heard about this angling for position, they became indignant. Is their reaction appropriate? Consider that in chapter 9, these guys were all involved in an argument about which of them was the greatest. In a real sense, James and John took the argument from theory into practice by trying to get Jesus to appoint them to positions of greatness. So even though Jesus told them all that greatness wasn't a goal and that the greatest would be the servant of all, the hand-picked apostles cannot seem to break out of this hierarchical thinking. Look at verse 42 and the beginning of verse 43. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you." Look at how Jesus opened up his statement. You know. This is brilliant on 2 levels. First, unless they deny knowing it, he's placed them all on a patch of common ground. And second, because they all know this, Jesus can counter-program their prevailing viewpoint. What is it that they all know? They know that secular culture, represented by the rulers of the Gentiles, in that time and place, the Romans, used their position in abusive ways against those lower than them on the organization chart. He says, everyone knows that secular culture is obsessed with positioning, greatness, and power for self-serving purposes. But then Jesus says something that they obviously did not know. But it shall not be so among you. But wait, there's a critically important grammatical issue for us to consider. The Greek text, as written by Mark, says, "But it is not so with you." Note, the you is plural. Not, "It shall not be so," but "It is not so with you." So what? Why does Greek grammar matter here? Because Jesus wasn't talking about how things would be at some future time. He, their master, is telling them how things are for his followers in the here and now, and it is not the same as in secular culture. The culture among disciples is not based on positions, power, and self-serving. Look at the rest of verse 43 and verse 44. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. To whom does this apply? To James and John? To all 12 apostles? No. To whoever wants to be great, referring to power, and whoever wants to be first, referring to position. Jesus says, if anyone is looking for power, he shall be your servant. The word translated servant is diakonos and means table servant. If you want to be powerful, you'll be a waiter to others. Then he says, if you are looking to be in the first position, you'll be a slave to all. The word slave in the first century wasn't chattel slavery, it was indentured slavery. People entered slavery to work off a debt or to get out of desperate poverty. Unlike chattel slavery, it was largely a position a person put themselves in. If you want to be number one, put yourself in the position of a slave, serving all the others. That's pretty big stuff. But Jesus isn't done yet. Look at verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Starting with the first half, what point is Jesus making to his apostles? Even the Son of Man, even the Messiah that they are following, even the miracle worker, calmer of storms, walker on water, and raiser of the dead did not come to be served, but to serve. So what? Would it make any sense for his followers to expect power and position and to be served by others? No, it would not. And he's still not done. How serious is he about this? How much of a change in value systems is he advocating? He then tells them that the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. Why does that matter? Because it sets the parameters of the service that Jesus is calling for. Serving others to what extent? To the extent of willingly giving his life as a ransom, to rescue others out of a situation from which they can't extricate themselves. Service to the point of self-sacrifice is the standard for the Messiah. So the Messiah's followers are surely not to be obsessed with position and power. So what is the biggest takeaway from this passage? For the followers of Jesus, true greatness is not about how many serve you, but how much you give yourself away in service to others. How does this apply to modern Christ followers? As Jesus did with the 12, let's start with what we all know. We all know that humans create hierarchies of power and privilege. And we know that churches and other faith-based groups are populated by humans. And we know that organizations require structure and accountability. But the purpose of that structure cannot be self-service and self-promotion if the organization operates in the name of Jesus. To be like Jesus is to serve others, not to serve self or ego, or to lord our position over others. Next time, Jesus passes through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem and heals a blind man. Thanks for studying with me. Let me know what you think about this passage in the comments.